Variant comic book covers are a hot button issue within the comic book fandom. It's either you love them or hate them, or you're like Doc and you love them and hate them. He likes variant covers, specifically with artists that he likes, but he also hates variant covers because they killed his ability to actually have a full collection of X-Men comics. He actually had to bow out because of variant covers. And here to talk with me about a very interesting article on Go Collect is Doc. How you doing, Doc?
I am wonderful, sir. Thank you for having me. So
you've got the love-hate relationship with the variant covers.
Well, actually, it's more of a evolution from love into just to hate to it's not apathy, but I am full on the hate wagon at this point. Yeah.
All right, there you go. This is the article from Go Collect. It's called 2023 Variant Comic Buyers Market Observations Hyper Hope, and he explains the problem. This is Joseph Overitis. New variant comics are the beanie babies of the comic book marketplace. These books are manufactured collectibles. Variants are the impulse buys of comic books because people want them before they even know the reason why. Collectors may love a comic book cover for their favorite artist and pay a premium for these books, but the prices paid are not established by the market. Investors hope to buy them to get good return on their investment, but have to act quickly to obtain copies. Both are told to strike fast or miss out because there's a race to buy these books. The problem is, unless these books' covers become iconic, they may not have long-term viability. Bernie Madoff made his investors feel the same way.
Wow. I mean, a little bit of exaggeration right there at the end, but he's not wrong, like, at all. Everything about this is accurate, from the manufactured collectibles to likening them to fucking beanie babies. You know, I have, especially with the manufactured collectibles of today, I have likened them to Franklin mint plates or other such nonsensical hype train collectibles.
You call them tchotchkes?
Yes, they are. There's
no inherent value to them whatsoever.
No, well, there really isn't. It's all about perceived value. I mean, it was one thing when Marvel was doing like 1 in 4 variants where you could just pull it off the shelf and stores didn't mark them up like the minute they got in. But once the ratio started increasing and you started with 1 in 10s, 1 in 25s, 1 in 100s, the stores started artificially inflating their A cover, orders in order to get those ratio variants, and then they would promptly mark them up, and you didn't really get the chance to decide whether or not it was worth it. And, again, as he said, the market didn't determine those. The stores did. Oftentimes people would get caught up in the FOMO of it, decide, you know what? Screw it. I'll spend the extra $10. And then you don't see what the market decides on these books until weeks or months after you've already pulled the trigger.
Potentially years after the fact. And I really can't blame the store, Doc.
No.
If you are a comic book shop specializing in new comic books and you hope to pay your bills that way, you've got bad stuff happening in your future. Because with the quality of the comic books DC and Marvel are putting out right now, you just can't count on that to be selling to your customers. It's probably not going to meet their needs as far as whether they're a reader or collector or any of that stuff. So one of the ways that comic book shops have found that you can kind of get around that and still have a thriving business is to go in on the variant comic book covers. But it is very risky. In fact, the author talks about some of the evidence that he's seen. The biggest reason comic book investors and collectors should avoid paying high prices for these books came in a court filing. Frankie's Comics LLC was a former brick and mortar store in North Carolina that went strictly online. This retailer specializes in variant comics. This company recently filed for bankruptcy protection under Chapter 11. A store that specialized in variant covers filing for bankruptcy is not a good sign to people paying high prices for these types of books. The rationale is, if a store has gone deeply into debt selling these books, the viability of these books being worth the high prices to individuals should be called into question. The problem with the variants is that in order to hit on a few books, you have to cast a wide net. Many books might not end up hitting. A low success rate can tie up capital. This is not a good strategy for companies, collectors, and investors in today's economy. So a lot of these companies, these comic book shops that are having to go into the variant market, are playing a dangerous game. And if they heavily invest in the wrong book that doesn't have the right cover, they can end up losing their ass. I've heard this story time and time again.
The variant market is a gamble. I mean, you're playing the lottery here. So
and today's current market environment, Doc, is not especially promising for this because a lot of people are having to tighten the belts. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of people are losing their jobs. There isn't as much discretionary money out there.
No,
but Marvel and DC aren't cutting back on variants.
No, they're really not. You hit the nail on the head with the economy and the shape it's in. Comics are a discretionary income purchase. They're gravy money purchases. So, and once you get into high dollar books, variant books, modern variants especially, you got to have the money. You can't afford to possibly lose your shirt on this.
So why invest in 10 new variant comic book covers, hoping that one or two hit, when you could just save that money, compile it for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month, and go out there and actually buy a key comic book that certainly costs a lot more money, but is proven in the market over decades at this point?
You see that for every one that hits, there's probably about 20 or 30 that just end up back in dollar bins the same way that the A cover did. If you don't have that money to gamble with, you're going to go for more sound investments.
This is what the author had to say about that. Investors who target variants cannot target only one book. Variants are introduced with many versions, and finding the one that will be successful might be costly. This may have been the same type of problem that Frankie's Comics experienced. Capital expenditures to find the right books were high with low rates of success. A business cannot survive spending a lot for a few sales, and neither can an individual. Spending a lot for books that are dropping is not a viable option for many. Finally, the long-term interest of many variants wanes over time. Prices drop because collectors and investors move on to different books. Let's talk about the comic book that got you out of the X-Men completionist. It was X-Men Gold #1, the Jim Lee variant cover, correct?
Yeah, they were like
1 in 1,000,
I think.
Cost $1,000 on day one, right, Doc?
Yep.
How much would it cost you to get that comic book today?
I think I can probably find it online for about $250 on eBay.
So you would have been out $750
in the long term, yeah,
to hit your FOMO and keep that collection going.
Exactly. And the minute that I saw that, I'm like, the likelihood of this book actually going up in value is pretty much nil. I think it's already at its peak value on release day. Anything after that, it might as well be a used car. It's going to lose half the value when I walk off the lot with it.
Well, and a lot of these things, like, they're not even worth $1,000 20 to 30 years after print. The characters have to be sustained in the market. There has to be a certain amount of limited availability of the comic books and stuff, and those things determine the price, not the ratio varying on day one. There's not one important character introduced in X-Men Gold #1. It's never going to be a key comic book, but they wanted $1,000 for it.
It was all about the perceived rarity on day one of them having to buy 1,000 copies in order to buy one copy of that. If you actually know enough about the comics industry, printers, whenever the publishers go to the print on them, they print by the case pack. So even if there was a 1 in 500 variant that was technically less rare, both of them had 250 copies printed at the printer because that's a case pack. So whether or not they got sold on day one, they're eventually going to trickle their way into the market out of the distributor because they had to print a minimum of 200.
You don't think Marvel and DC destroy those? They got proof of it?
Nope, they don't destroy them because they eventually.
I know there are warehouses full of variants.
Pre-Penguin, and whenever it was still all Diamond, about every 6 months, Diamond would send out a list to all the retailers of available variants that they have in there that they just made them orderable at regular price. Then the stores 6 months later would be able to buy up any of the remaining variants. Now, granted, they were, they could, if there was a really hot one that was still sitting there, they got to be real quick on the trigger because one of the other stores would have pulled the trigger. But every other book, they might buy those variants because they could sell them, what they could sell for $50 before, they could only sell for 25, but they're still buying them at cover price now. So they'll buy them up then. But if the hot book, good luck on that one.
One of the interesting things that the author also talks about are the people out there really hyping these things up and what they're not taking into account. Many books are introduced with variants by hot artists. The important thing to remember is that an artist may be hot today but forgotten tomorrow. The whims of the market change as time passes. Many comic book sites hype a recently released book and how successful it is on the second market. Rarely do these sites look at these editions long term. These sites spread FOMO. Buying a book only because it is hot is not a way to collect or invest. The cover's composition and quality matter. Jack Kirby covers have been in demand for decades. Collectors still realize that some of his covers are better than others. People want those books, and the result is higher prices for the most iconic covers. Hype sites never consider, with this new hot variant cover, the actual composition and the makeup of the cover itself. And I don't know if you've noticed this, Doc. A lot of these variant covers are very generic and very bland. It's almost as if they just created them a year ahead of time and they've decided it's a variant cover.
A lot of times they're just commissioning artists to essentially draw a pinup and, a quote unquote iconic, pose cover. And then there's
kind of pose, Doc. It's three characters, one looking forward, one looking to the left, and one looking to the right.
Oh, absolutely. And then they all
suck. They're very bad movie posters.
Yeah, exactly. The composition of them is really lame, very generic. And then, but they commission these artists to draw 4 or 5 or 6 of them, and they just throw them in a drawer and then they just slap them on a book that it might be sort of appropriate for. And sometimes it's not even appropriate for that book.
No, there'll be characters on the cover that are not in the book.
They have an inventory. Almost the same way that back in the day, they used to have inventory stories that they'd commission, and then they could slap in whatever the main story got a delay because of the writer or the artist. Now they have variant cover inventory covers that they could just slap onto a book. Most of these variants aren't going to hold real value. A lot of the artists, they're flavor of the week artists. Like I really like Peach Momoko's art. In 5 years ago, or 5 years from now, is Peach Momoko variants going to be worth a good goddamn? I don't know. However, I do have history to say that Jack Kirby cover on Captain America is going to be a value. I do have,
or a Greg Capullo even on a Batman if it was new.
Exactly. I do have evidence to say that a J. Scott Campbell variant, especially the ratio variants on Spider-Man, is going to hold value. A Jim Lee variant, well, not so much.
How about a Mark Brooks variant on X-Men?
Yeah,
valuable.
Nope. No, I mean those, like almost all of those, like
the wet comic book cover, Doc. That's what I want to know. Wow, those characters look like they just came out of the shower.
Yeah, exactly. If it's I mean, almost all of those, like Mark Brooks wet covers from House of X, Powers of X.
Is that what you said?
Yes.
All those Mark Brooks wet farts they call covers.
Exactly. all the ones that from House and Powers that were released and that were kind of expensive whenever they launched, you could probably find them for half to a third of the price right now in the back issue bins. They might have been $50 on release day. You could probably find them for 20 right now. You have to have a combination of a great cover with a great artist on a book that somebody fucking wants. You can't just slap it on She-Hulk #7 and expect anybody to give a good goddamn, especially if it's a variant from somebody that nobody gives a damn about, like Raphael Grandpa. Who the fuck's gonna give a shit in 3 months?
Of course, all these variant covers and the demand, it's just fake demand. It's all about the FOMO, which can absolutely get your ass in comic book collecting. In fact, Doc and I talked about navigating FOMO, what FOMO can do to you, and how to avoid some of the pitfalls of all of this. Really great video, really great conversation about that. If you don't see it here, there's also a link in the video description.